Hello, and thank you for joining me today to talk about MSSPs and technological growth. My name is Michael Weir. I'm your Fortinet NSE 7 certified technical account manager for Fortinet here at Ingram Micro, and I'll be the one taking you through this presentation today. Now, this is going to be a very dollars and cents presentation, cents in the SE presentation, in that I'm going to be talking about technologies you can use and the things they do, and saying, does this make sense for you? If it does make sense for you, it could make you dollars. If it doesn't make sense for you yet, I'm sure there will come a time. Now, this is from MSSPSuccessMagazine.com, so we can take, some people may think it's accurate, some people may not, it could be distorted, but this is just a number to work from. 26% of all MSPs have revenue less than $500K a year, and more of those will fail than will grow. All right, this is a fast-growing market, but this is also an agile market, and this is a place where people are going to have more and more specific needs, the more requirements and regulations and things like that come out. So we have to ask ourselves, what makes you special? So this is my own little generated pathway to MSSP success. And the 4 different kinds of MSSPs I think there are. There's a starting MSSP, a growing MSSP, a specializing MSSP, and then the ultimate MSSP. So the way to look at these is by what services they offer, right? A starting MSSP is someone who's providing basic managed devices by customers on a customer-by-customer basis. There's nothing centralized. There's no additional services. Just like, hey, we're going to give you a firewall, and we'll manage that firewall with you or co-manage it. Next would be your growing MSSP. These are people that have centralized management of multiple customers' devices and offer some centralized security services. So it's like, hey, we have 15 customers, and it's getting too hard for us to connect to each firewall individually for each customer and fix it, and some of them have multiple sites and that kind of thing. So we're going to put together a NOC, and we're going to manage everything centrally. We're going to provide some additional security services as we can. A specializing MSSP is when you start tailoring products to certain verticals or markets while you provide a more complete security solution. So this is when you've got past your SOC, which will probably be in a growing MSSP thing, to where you got some SIM or some SOAR management. You maybe have some APIs you've built, things like that going on. And then, of course, there's the ultimate MSSP, which is where you're operating with everything I just said, plus you're custom making things in-house, be them apps or services, anything else along those lines, so that you can offer something that nobody else offers. 2 we're going to look at today are going to be the growing MSSP and the specializing MSSP. Now, the reason we're doing that is I feel like a starting MSSP is something that most people can intuitively put together, and the ultimate MSSP is something that's so customized that there's almost nothing I can say to go to it. It's something that will grow organically once you're a specializing MSSP. So we're going to look at it from a technological perspective. We're going to look at it broken into these levels. The first is going to be the firewall. Obviously, if you're going to be an MSSP, the first thing you're going to do is put in a security device into your customer's environment. That's relatively obvious. Next is going to be security expansion. This is starting to grow from the core, but it's not necessarily every product is for everyone, but almost everyone will need more than one of the products. So you've got your firewall. Almost everybody's going to be using email, so they'll probably use email security. Everybody's got PCs, laptops, mobile devices, etc., so they're probably going to need endpoint security. Some people might want MFA, WAF, CWP, NACs, that sort of thing, the things that they're going to need specifically for what they're trying to do. After that is when you start getting into the centralization we spoke about before, which is when you're going to have your proactive real-time monitoring. You're going to look at your network health and security. This is your NOC SOC level. For those who don't know, it's Network Operations Center and Security Operations Center. Next level is when you get some focused event visibility and management. Now, this is all your attack surface monitoring and mitigating. This is when we're going to more advanced, specialized things. This is like SIM, EDR, parentheses, sort of. We'll get to why it's just sort of in a little bit. And then on top of that, of course, is your full solution. This is your automated playbook, trackable responses to all security threats and issues. This is a SOAR, maybe using an AI or something. For the record, SOAR is security orchestration, automation, and response. All right, we have that down. Let's talk about the growing MSSP. Specifically, we're going to talk about the portion that's the SOC, Security Operations Center. So this is where we are in this tree. We're assuming you already have local management, which is your first step. So we're assuming you already have a NOC, which is centralized MACD, management reporting, things along those lines. We are watching the network operations. We're going to start off on the SOC here, which is we are doing centralized monitoring of your threats and your breaches, analytics, reporting, compliance, mitigation, remediation, threat tracing, forensics. And one note about this is it's easier with the same vendor for security and networking, so you don't have 2 separate tracking systems. Obviously, if you didn't hear from my certification, I'm the Fortinet guy, but you know what? Either way, it's just easier than where you can consolidate things into a single pane of glass. So What does a good SOC look like? Well, once again, I'm using the Fortinet example here in FortiAnalyzer. It's the idea that we can see somebody who's been through some kind of threat. We can take that threat and we can drill down, and we can see exactly when it happened, who it happened to, what happened, source, destination, user, all these different things. To say this is how an event happened, and take that information and say this is how we can stop it from happening again. Right? It's more visibility than just saying, oh, somebody got a virus, let's run endpoint scans on anybody. This lets you see specifically what was going on, so you can monitor and tailor your firewall rules thereafter. And this is relatively light forensics, of course, compared to some of the things we're going to talk about downstream, but this is just something you can do here. And, of course, a big part of that is that you're doing centralized reporting, too. That you don't have to go through device by device and pull logs and try to correlate them, but you can prove to people compliances and help them meet those upper level things they're going to have to start meeting. So if you got PCI DSS customers that need to be compliant in that way, you can set and forget this so that there's minimal effort on the part of your techs, but it's still a report that's being generated automatically as both a self-audit and so you can show them, hey, this is what we've been doing for you, aka a billable service. So when is the time to bring in a SOC? Is it for me? Is it for me now? And is it in my future? The positive to a SOC is that generally it has easy integration. Almost all of the major security vendors have one. They include more or less their products depending. Once again, you want a single pane as much as you can. But they almost all have one like that. And usually it reports from all of your security devices. Once again, changes depending on the manufacturer, but ideally it would. Enables quick reactions, tracking, and forensics, and it has a low cost of entry, normally speaking, once again, by a vendor. Sometimes that's relative. The negative is not all brands have a SOC product, and not all SOC products work with all brands. This is something that often does become brand specific. So once you're committing to having a SOC, you're usually committing to having one brand or maybe just one or two brands in your deployment. So what triggers it, one would be the MSP to MSSP transition, when you're trying to put that extra S in there and move towards a more focused security solution. When you have customers that have compliance requirements and you want to do something better than just reporting by hand. Or when you have anything else that gives you a need for active threat investigation instead of just basic reporting. Next stage would be specializing MSSP, which is where we're going to get into SIM. SIM is Security Incident and Event Management. If you think I'm wrong with that, feel free to tell me in the comments. I throw it in this description here, which is that it's a correlation of NOC, SOC, and other data. It's correlating real-time events. It's mapping user identity behaviors. It's a semi-automated incident mitigation in some cases, and it pulls from as many sources as possible. This is when we're moving on from our SOC, which is generally a single or couple of vendor solution, to SIM, which is pulling from everything in the network. How does the SIM work? Well, here's our FortiSIM as an example. It's pretty comprehensive and foolproof in the hands of good tech and sets you apart, but I'm sure most people looking at this video right now are either staring at this and trying to follow the arrows and figure out what's going on, or by this point just stop trying. So let's break it down to a single machine. So this is an incident we're looking at here. So you have a supervisor, which has all the rules and is watching things, the collector, which is collecting information and sending it to the supervisor, then an enforcement device, which is what's saying, all right, this is what's been told to do. It's very noisy. It takes a lot of time to learn and to customize. But as I said, once it's in the hands of a good tech, it's a very powerful thing. So then we have to ask ourselves the question, is this SIM for me? Is this SIM for me right now? And where is this SIM in my future? There are a lot of positives to a SIM. So it's incredibly deep, incredibly rich with complete visibility and actionable intelligence. Important for MSPs and MSSPs, it's also usually easily multi-tenant. It's usually easy to expand. And it's usually easy to expand with additional feature licenses from whoever this is. SIMs are kind of where it's at right now. So there's usually a bunch of options you can have and a bunch of extra services you can pull in, like that UEBA and that sort of thing. And then a big thing is it differentiates you from the market, right? Negatives are that it is a very complex initial deployment that requires trained professionals. As I said, it's something that requires tuning. It's noisy. There's not something you can say every environment is like this or like that. It's something you can maybe do some golden images for, but this is something that needs to be used by the hands of trained professionals. And then some of your triggers, of course, would be security-sensitive customers, people that have tight compliances, government or healthcare, education, like that. Once again, your MSP-MSSP transition, saying you have a SOC is one thing, saying you have a SIM puts you on another level. And also a crowded local market. At least in my area, there's a number of MSSPs out there that all offer more or less the exact same services to some degree, and obviously some are better than others, but one way to differentiate yourself in a situation like that is to offer things that other people can't or won't offer. Next in our specializing MSSP path, of course, will be the SOAR. Now, the SOAR is kind of top of the heap. This is generally a product you get once you have an established SIM and you have a lot of established customers, and that this will be something that causes automated incident handling and response. It stands for security orchestration and, oh gosh, I forgot what I said earlier. Feel free to rewind the video and see what SOAR stands for. Forensics, artifact enrichment, reacting, tracking, remediating, and reporting. This is something that's it's sort of like a tech, except it's a tech that can have artificial intelligence and react at machine speed. So once we end up getting those bioelectronic implants that Elon Musk is researching, maybe we won't need SOARs. But for now, this is where things come in. A SOAR, the main thing about it is that it's playbooking and automated response. So this is a picture from SOAR 4 to SOAR, once again on the Fortinet guy, etc., etc. A tech tells the machine what to do when X happens. And one cool thing about this is you can show your customers beforehand, hey, this is our plan. Afterwards, you can say, hey, look, here's the steps we took. Here's how our plan happened. Once again, this is billable, right? But the idea is that when a security event happens, it triggers it. There's some configuration changes, some investigative notes that are made. It sends it down a tree of different responses based on what's going on, and ends up in a resolution where it will just output a report saying, here's what we did, or it'll resolve it as much as it can before it notifies the tech, or it'll do whatever you told it to do, right? Maybe you'll make it phone Elon Musk and say, get that implant ready faster. I don't know. But the power of it is it's happening at machine speed with artificial intelligence. Enables you not just to handle threats faster, but to sift through threats more efficiently. Because I'm willing to bet if you just have a SIM or even just a SOC, the volume of information is making you miss things. So this is something where, since it's handling alerts much more quickly, you also have much more accurate security just because of the limitations of humans or how many people you want to handle to do a certain job. So what are the upsides and downsides to SOAR? Is it for me? Is it for me now? And is it in my future? So the positives are that it greatly decreases the number of techs required because, once again, you can playbook in it and have it act like a really fast tech. Greatly decreases your response time because it's a machine, not a tech. Usually these almost all have built-in tracing, tracking, and ticketing systems. And typically speaking, just the way for most of them are licensed, there's no scaling cost. It's you buy a SOAR. Some manufacturers you pay per person logging into the SOAR. Others it's just you buy the platform and then it's up to you. Not always the case, but generally speaking. The negative, of course, though, since it's something that doesn't typically have scaling, there has to be some barrier of entry, and that's that typically it's a very steep initial investment. When it comes down to it, this is a very sophisticated and complicated program that you're running on the back end. Nobody's going to give that stuff away for free unless it's either A, very hard to use and doesn't have much built into it to begin with, or B, it's not very good. Some of the triggers that would come for this, though, is not just if you need more security, but if your SIM is giving you alert fatigue. Right, there's negative unemployment right now in security professionals. So if you're getting alert fatigue in your techs, you might not even be able to find another tech to hire. That's just how it is. Some other things that could trigger it would be ineffective response times, cybersecurity staffing shortages, I already mentioned that a little bit, or a disproportionately high number of man hours spent on monitoring and response. So if you're always having minor incidents and you're spending a lot of time, a lot of man hours responding to these minor incidents, then a SOAR might be something to look into. Now, our last thing I'm calling it breaking barriers is EDR. Now, this is one of those things I said, it's sort of in a maybe category for where it goes. So EDR stands for Endpoint Detection and Response. Typically, it's next generation antivirus, asset discovery, inventorying, attack service investigation, remediation, vulnerability management, kernel protection, threat hunting, tracing, post-infection, protection, and forensics. In other words, it's something that when something happens, it responds in a lot of different ways for you, almost as though a SOAR does for your network, but here focusing on your endpoints. So here's where we are with things right now. Endpoint antivirus is pretty much ubiquitous. Everybody has something that prevents the file-based malware. It's nearly 100% penetration. Endpoint protection platforms are things that prevent file-based malware as well as malicious activities and give you some tools to remediate and respond. There's both, home use and enterprise use levels of this, but that's roughly 95% market penetration according to the various industry publications. EDR, which would be the next level up from that, all the stuff we just talked about, the recording of behaviors and events, detecting the incidents, malware processes, containing, remediate, doing forensics and root cause analysis, all that kind of thing. That only has a 20 to 30% penetration. So that's where the dollars are, and that's where the opportunities are open for the taking, assuming you have somebody that can implement EDR for you. So here's my example of how EDR works. Once again, we're working with the Fortinet product here. They typically have some kind of pre-attack filter, because if they didn't, there'd be a legion of false positives. And there is still tuning, like there is for a SIM, that goes into implementing this properly. But there's usually some kind of next-generation antivirus or requirement for next-generation antivirus. Then there's observation. A good SIM sits in the kernel. A not as good SIM uses kernel hooks. But either way, when it sits there, it's collecting OS metadata to look for triggers. Now, a trigger is a snapshot that's taken, or I'm sorry, a trigger causes a snapshot to be taken when there's a new connection or a file modification request is sent to the core. Now, when this happens, there is an analysis where the snapshot is looked at and initiates an incident response if necessary, or says, hey, this is good. Might still store the snapshot for future reference depending on your settings. And then, if that is bad, it will do automated remediation, real-time containment mitigation, termination, whatever is necessary to stop whatever triggered that event. So if it's triggered by, say, a file being encrypted that there isn't a response to any kind of encryption request or something along those lines, it will stop the encryption in its tracks pre-execution or upon execution. It'll say to the other devices, hey, let's contain this device. It'll contain the threat within a device, terminate the processes, and remediate. Typically, since these things happen pre-execution, or remediation will be pretty simple because you don't have to unencrypt the file. Worst one, sometimes you lose a file or two, because some of them do. The cheaper EDR products, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. If somebody's like, oh, you buy our $10 license antivirus and you get EDR thrown in for free. Their EDR doesn't really work on the kernel, or even sometimes on a kernel hook. What it'll do is do things like place decoy files. So if there's a ransomware attack, they'll name the decoy files in such a way they're almost like internal honeypots. And when one of those gets encrypted, then it will initiate its response. But that's really kind of a not very accurate way of doing it, because anything like that that's static is something that a hacker can then use to their advantage or compensate for, much like the earlier generation of sandboxes. So EDR. Is it for you? Is it for you now? And where is it in your future? Positives about EDR is much, much greater protection against modern threats. So it be that fileless malware, ransomware, things along those lines that are above and beyond what old EPP could catch. Usually requires no additional hardware, sometimes software, depending on if it includes next generation antivirus or not. And typically speaking, from an end user's perspective, it's a simple, invisible deployment. Will it be for you? If you're watching this in your MSSP, no, it's going to be quite hard and complicated. But to the people whose devices you're putting it on, it's typically very transparent. Another downside of this, though, besides some of the things I've mentioned in passing here, is much like a SIM, it needs trained professionals. This is another thing that's noisy and needs tuning, typically. Triggers for this would be if you have people with the big R concerns, ransomware. They have frequent bad user behaviors, be it people who are malicious, people who are just dumb. If you've got mixed vendor endpoint deployments where you need some kind of unifying thing, or if you're spending a disproportionate amount of time on endpoint threats, there's a reason to look into EDR too. Here's the conclusion of this all. Conclusion of the matter is just that you need to move up these steps. You're going to be one of those MSSPs who, you're in a quarter that makes less than $500,000 a year and is probably going to fail. If you're a starting MSSP, it's good to be happy where you are, but it's not good to sit still and say, this is all we're going to do. You need to keep advancing as the market advances, or you're going to be left behind. It'd be cool if somebody that watches this and then becomes like one of the ultimate MSSPs here, or, does really well in their vertical, has some great success story. Feel free to comment, subscribe, like, whatever you want to do. I just like to hear good things that are going on with people who listen to these. So thank you very much for tuning in. My name is Michael Weir. I am a Fortinet NSE 7 certified technical account manager for Fortinet at Ingram Micro. You see my email right there. Feel free to shoot something over. Like, comment, subscribe, whatever you want to do. And have yourselves a very good day.